Hello, my dear amazing learners. I am Nisha Nandini. Welcome back to today's class on continuation of living world. Okay, so let's recollect what we studied yesterday. We were given a very rough introduction regarding the Unit 1 diversity in living world, where we spoke about what is biology, which is simply the science of life forms and living processes, and the amazing diversity around us. We were able to differentiate the inanimate and animate matter humans would have done, and much later in the human history there were recordings of the living organisms, and systematic and monumental descriptions were brought out of necessity, the need to classify organisms. Then identification, nomenclature and classification were all part of this concept. The biggest spin-off of such studies was the recognition of sharing similarities. So when I say similarities, it's about both horizontal, which means at the same level, and vertical, levels above and the levels below. So we were able to find similarities among us and above and below us. So that was what basically we tried to study here. And next, we studied about a great scientist. Ernest Mayr was born on 5th of July 1904 in Campton, and there are some important things that you should remember always. He was Darwin of the 20th century, Alexander Agassiz Professor of Zoology Emeritus, a special recognition which was given to him, the areas in which he studied, and the Triple Crown of Biology that he was awarded with. The award names you should be remembering. Okay, and then today, okay, after this, we were also looking at the introduction of the living world. Where did we see? Even in impossible places like oceans, mountains, freshwater lakes, deserts, and hot springs, and amazing places, we can find living organisms. So that was one good ideology. And then we were able to find and appreciate nature, and we ended up with the question, what is life? And there were two ways parting. One is the philosophical one, the other one is scientific one. The philosophical one wants to know what is the purpose of life, why is life created, and the scientific perspective wants to know the difference between the living and non-living. So we'll deal into it today. Fine. Next, the diversity in living world is the exact place where we should start focusing more and more on the concept. If you look around, you will see a large variety of living organisms, be it potted plants. What is potted plants? We grow plants. So these are potted plants, insects, birds, your pets, cat, dogs, or other animals and plants. There are also several organisms that you cannot see with naked eye. What is naked eye? The eyes without any aids. Maybe you can say without spectacles, without microscope, you cannot see those tiny organisms. But just because you cannot see, it doesn't mean they don't exist. So there are still organisms that you cannot see with your naked eye all around you. Okay, even in some hand wash advertisements and then dishwasher advertisements, they have shown those microorganisms which are invisible to the naked eye. If you were to increase the area, so what they basically mean by increase the area? Oh. Okay, if you were to increase the area, so area means, let's say I have this small quarter titled A. If you were to take a small survey of what are the different kind of organisms thrive there, I will say trees, herbs, and shrubs. So these are three different kind of plants that you can see in a forest. Trees 10, herbs 20, shrubs 25. Okay, and then I'm telling the total count irrespective of variety. And now I'm telling you its variety. There are three varieties of trees, and everything counts together to 10. Herbs, there are 5 varieties of herbs and 6 varieties of shrubs. When I increase the area A to B, what happens? So this is the survey I took in A, this is the survey I am taking in B. Rather than 10, there is 12, and rather than 4, it is 5. And this is 30 and 6, 35 and 7. So When you increase the area of observation from A to A plus B, remember, when you increase, you are also including the region that you first counted. So A and A plus B. When you compare this, what happens? The range in variety, what does the range stand for? Range stands for these numbers. 10 becomes 12, 20 becomes 30, 25 becomes 35, and that is the range. What is variety? 3 becomes 5, 5 becomes 6, 6 becomes 7. Maybe 6 may remain 6, but they will never become 6, 5. They will never become lesser. Because as you increase the area, the number of species increases, or sometimes they may remain constant. But in most cases, what happens? They face an increase. So how can you put that together? When you increase area, variety, and range increase. That's so fundamental and so beautiful, because as you increase the area, you can see these kind of things increasing. Obviously, if you were to visit a dense forest is where you can see a lot of vegetation, a lot of plants together, herbs, trees, shrubs. They were so close. You call it a dense forest. When you take count of plants, they are definitely high. When you take a class of animals, definitely they are going to be high. You'll probably see a much greater number and kind of living organisms in it. Each different kind of plant, animal, organism that you see represents a species. For example, if you go out, I look at a neem tree, a mango tree, and a banyan tree. There are three different types of tree. All these individual tree represents individual species. The number of species that are known and described range between the value that has been given. 1.7 to 1.8 million. So can I tell you again? So this data was taken long back. When you take the current statistics, the values might have gone high because a lot of new different organisms have been discovered with the years between the publication of the book and the current year. Okay. So this current, but from its perspective, this is enough. If you remember 1.7 to 1.8 million species are present, that's fine. The next comes the biodiversity. Okay. What is biodiversity? I've told you before, bio is life. Diversity is variety. Variety in life form is known as biodiversity. Okay. So they are telling you in other words also, biodiversity or the number and types. So just the example we took before, A, B. So number and types present on earth. We should remember here as we explore new areas. Okay, so the example that we now saw. So when you expand A to B, when you go to new areas, you can find more species. Sometimes even when you rediscover same thing after some 5-6 years, what happened? Still you will have lot of species. The possibility of finding a new species is very high. We should remember here that as we explore new areas and even old ones, new organisms are constantly identified. We can find more and more organisms. As stated earlier, there are millions of plants and animals in the world. We know the plants and animals in our own area by local names. So how do you understand this local name? Local name is like a pet name. So in our family, they'll be calling you with a very short name. Maybe they'll shorten your name and they call you. Or they keep some other name and they call you. In your school setup, they'll use some other name and call you. If a person from your family using that word, they want to get you from your school, that is not possible because they will not identify whose this particular name will tag to. Okay, so they will be kind of confused and they will not be able to identify. Same thing happens in the living world in case of plants and animals. So let's see how. These local names would vary from place to place. You know, there are different people in the world. They speak different languages, especially even within a country. Why? Because country like India, people speaks a lot of language. English, Tamil, Malayalam, Hindi, Urdu, and there are lot of languages. So each of them will have their own names, their own name for the plant, their own name for the animal. So a person speaking one language, trying to communicate it about the plant to another person is very difficult unless they have the plant in hand. They have the plant in hand. Both of them will say, oh, this plant, this is the plant that person is talking about. They'll get to know. In case the plant is not present, what will they do? They'll stay in the confusion, or that may be misleading sometimes too. Probably you would recognize the confusion that will be created if we did not find ways and means to talk to each other. If you're not going to find a methodology that will work to find out the right name or some constant name that will not elicit any confusion, there is a need to standardize the method of nomenclature, and that's what we are going to study now. Hence, there is a need to standardize the naming of living organisms. We have to set up certain protocols, certain rules, and we have to name accordingly, such that a particular name is known by the same name all over the world. So this doesn't mean that you should never have a vernacular name. So, local name is also known as vernacular name. Okay, so you can expect this terminology somewhere, maybe. So local name is also known as what? Vernacular name. Okay, so it doesn't mean that you should never have a vernacular name. It does mean that you should have a common name also that must be applicable, or that must be understandable by everybody in the globe, or at least the person who speaks science. Okay, that's what they are trying to say. And that process of naming of plants and animals is known as nomenclature. So as much as you give importance for nomenclature, you must also give importance for identification. What basically identification is? Nomenclature or naming is only possible when the organism is described correctly. What is described correctly? You should be able to give proper information. What proper information? Its color, fruit color, leaf color, arrangement, inflorescence type, root structure, and any unique properties they have. You are able to describe them and you name them. Any person in the world, when you describe the same characters, can identify that plant, and they can immediately connect the name to it. If your description is wrong, then identification becomes wrong and nomenclature also goes wrong. Okay, so all these things are interconnected and they are very important. We know to what organism the name is attached. This is identification. Okay, you describe, this description fits to this plant, okay, and then we tag it with a name. That's how things work. In order to facilitate the study, number of scientists have established procedures to assign a scientific name. So we should have a certain set of rules. So only when everybody follows the rules, it is standardized and it is regulated. So scientists are trying to put up a lot of rules to put or to give a proper channel of naming or proper rule for naming. This is acceptable to biologists all over the world. Anybody who wants to learn how to name should follow these rules. So this is applicable for everybody all around the world, irrespective of the continent they live, okay, irrespective of the language. Everybody have to follow this rule. This is acceptable for plants. Scientific names based on agreed principles and criteria, which are provided in the International Code for Botanical Nomenclature. So when it comes to plants, what do they do? ICBN. When it comes to animals, ICZN. Okay, so ICBN is International Code of Botanical Nomenclature. ICZN is International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. How do you remember? So here there's a small thing that may lead to a silly mistake in your examination and make you get a -1 mark, which I don't want. So I'm letting you know International Code for Botanical Nomenclature. You can remember like FB. So International Code for Botanical Nomenclature and International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. You can find it here. International Code for Botanical Nomenclature and International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. The scientific name ensures that each organism has only one name. So when you follow these protocols, organisms will have only one name. That is very, very, very important, because the whole idea behind naming is to ensure that the naming is correct. Okay, so naming is correct. We are able to tag it to a specific thing. So if things goes wrong, if this is applicable to more than, if several of the organism has same name, then the system fails. The whole point of standardizing the rules goes futile. So what they do? Only one thing should have the correct name. They also ensure that such a name has not been used for any other known organisms. So what you do before naming a plant, when you identify this is novel, you are going to name it for the first time, you should make sure that no other organism was named the same before this one. Yours should be unique and non-repetitive. Okay, that is very important. Okay, so we'll come to the next part. Biologists follow universally accepted principles to provide scientific names to known organism. Each name will have two components, which is known as generic name, specific epithet. This system of providing name with two components is called binomial nomenclature, which was given by Carolus Linnaeus. Okay, so let me put it up here for you. So there was a problem with naming of plants and animals, that is nomenclature. So to sort this problem of nomenclature, binomial, that is the scientific name should consist of two components. So binomial nomenclature was introduced by Carolus Linnaeus. Sorry. Okay, so this was introduced by him. So according to binomial system of nomenclature, the scientific name should have two components, which is generic name as well as specific epithet. Okay, so this is first important rule, and you should also ensure that there is no repetition. The name that you are keeping for it must be very unique. Okay, let us take the example of mango. So you are using this name Mangifera indica. Let us see how it is a binomial name. So based on these two rules, what I have told you, you should have a generic name, you should have a specific name. So Mangifera is your generic name, then indica, it is your specific epithet. Is that clear? Is that point is getting clear? Good. And next, we are going to look at the rules that has been given. So what are the rules? The genus, while indica is a particular species or specific epithet, other rules, universal rules are as follows. We are going to, before this we saw two rules. They were not being enlisted here, but still they are also important. The name should never be repeated. So repetition of the name is strictly avoided. Second, the binomial nomenclature should have two components, right? The biological names are generally in Latin. Why Latin? Why not some other language? Because Latin is known as dead language, because nobody uses it currently. In order to avoid confusion and conflict among nations, because if you use a language like English, the countries that don't speak English will say it is like favorism to English speaking people. So in order to avoid that, we are using Latin language, which is spoken by none. So there won't be any conflict among scientists. And it is always written in italics. So italics is, this font. So you can see there's a slight tilt, so you can see a slight movement here. So that is known as italics. We have to always write it in italics. And they are either Latinized, meaning you can give up the name in your language and then you can translate into Latin. Or the name by itself may come from Latin. Latin origin can also be considered. Okay, the first point here we are telling is Latin. So the name should be non-repetitive, it should have two components and it should be in Latin. The first word will be representing your genus. The second name will represent your specific epithet. So both the words in biological name, how you are doing, when you are writing, you have to underline separately. Or when you print, you can put like this. Why you are doing this? To indicate the Latin origin. So when you read a text like this, you see written as Magifera indica. Written as in English, Mangifera indica has Latin origin. So just to give this ideology to you, we are just differentiating it. It's very simple as that. And next part, the first word denoting the genus should, yeah, just a minute, yeah. The first word denoting the genus starts with a capital letter, okay. So it starts with a capital letter and the specific epithet starts with a small letter. It can be illustrated with the example of Mangifera indica. Again, you see, Mangifera's genus starts with capital, indica species starts with capital I. Sorry, small starts with small. Make a correction here. I'll repeat once again. Mangifera is the genus. It starts with letter capital G, and indica is the genus name. It starts with a small letter. Okay. Make a note, make a note, make a note. Mangifera M capital, indica I small. Remember. Next, name of the author appears after the specific epithet. What you do? So that we have our parent's name at the end of our name, like whatever mother or father. Here also the person who described the plant for the first time gets his name at the back of the plant name. How do we write then? Mangifera indica Linn. So the real come again, Linnaeus. But what do? We write it as Linn, Linn dot. It's an abbreviated name. And when you are writing, you should see this pattern. Mangifera italics, indica italics. Linn is not italics. Why? Because Mangifera and indica have been written in italics to indicate its Latin origin. But Linnaeus doesn't have, the word Linnaeus doesn't have Latin origin, it's simply the name of the author. So we don't write it in italics. We always write it in capital, with first letter capital and the rest of the letters in normal tone. We don't italicize them, we do not underline them. So this is known as the author's name. It is abbreviated. Okay. Now we'll just put a very simple revision of the biological stuff, biological nomenclature thing that we studied now. Biological nomenclature. So biological nomenclature is of two things. So only thing I am discussing is from the NCERT. I am not disturbing you with other things. International Code for Botanical Nomenclature, International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. And all the rules that I mentioned is like common. There are several other specific rules which applies only for plants, specifically applicable for animals, but they have not discussed that. The first major thing is they must not be repetitive. Okay, the name that you're having now should not be present before that. It should be unique. What is the second condition? It should have two components. Okay, what are the two components? Generic name and specific epithet. It should have two components. Third one, Latin. Either they must be Latinized, that is you translate, or it should be from Latin origin. 4. So there are two components are generic name and specific name. So then Latin, it should be in Latin or Latinized. And next point comes to be your indication. So generic name, what you do? First letter, capital, and specific epithet, first letter small. Okay, and fifth point is you write author's abbreviated name at end. Okay, so biological nomenclature, ICBN, ICZN, International Code for Botanical Nomenclature, International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. Then ICBN, you should say that the name is not repetitive, that is no other plant should have the name that you are giving now, and it should have two components. the generic name and specific name. That is why the name is known as biological nomenclature. Third is Latin. The name is either be in Latin or from the origin, or it can be translated. And when you are writing in Latin, so when to indicate its Latin origin, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? You are either, when you print, you put it up in italics, or when you write by hand, you should underline them separately. That is important. Okay. And then generic name, the first letter must be capital, specific epithet small, author's abbreviated name at the end. So you can have this. So this is one good name, and you are seeing whether they fit into it. So it is non-repetitive, two components, generic name, specific epithet. So you shouldn't include this because that is not actually the name part. It is to indicate or indicate the contribution of the author. Then this is from Latin origin or Latinized, I can say. They are either italics, but still I'm writing. I'm underlining them separately. I'm not underlining this author's name. And generic name, first letter comes to be capital, and yeah, it comes to be capital, and this comes to be small. Here I mentioned. Then author's abbreviated name at the end. So it should never be italicized, never be written with underline. It should be written normally, the first letter capital and full stop at the bottom. Okay, so that's the concept that we studied today, the biological nomenclature. So I hope you understood whatever I have explained. Just leave a thumbs up sign at the bottom if you are getting what I'm meaning. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.